Okay, I want to close out what we were talking about last week with Kings and Chronicles, and the purpose of that, and what I really want you to get out of it. If you look at how, as a discussion question asks, how is David treated differently between Kings and Chronicles? We see, for instance, or I guess Samuel and Kings and Chronicles. Excuse me. We see that David, uh, for instance, the Bathsheba affair is talked about in the books of Samuel, and we see that that becomes kind of the tipping point of his reign, and then after that, his kingdom, his I guess administration, if you want to use that term, goes downhill from there. That's kind of the tipping point from good to bad. And of course, we see with his son Solomon that Solomon in the books of Kings, the book of First Kings, he starts off really well, but then he tapers off, and by the end of his life, he is idolatrous and doing all those things that Deuteronomy said kings should not do. In Chronicles, we don't really get all of that. We don't get the Bathsheba incident at all. We don't see Solomon's failures. We don't see David's failures, and so we see that Chronicles portrays the Davidic dynasty, and specifically David and Solomon, in a much more positive light. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves: does this mean that Chronicles is inaccurate? Well, no, it's not. It doesn't. It means that Chronicles has a point to make, and by focusing on David's flaws, that doesn't help it make its point. We have to understand that these books that we call historical books are not written from the 20th century or 21st century perspective of the purpose of history, which is just to recount facts and actions and events that happened in the past. No, these books are written as theological books in order to teach the people of God something about who God is, who we are, how we respond to God. And so the authors chose what they presented to fit that purpose. It was a means to an end. The information that they provide is the means. The end is the theological lesson. So when we're studying these books, we have to ask ourselves, what are they wanting us to get out of it? Why did they present the information that they presented? What is it they're trying to teach us? We don't want to try to find what they're leaving out. We want to focus on what they put in and say, this. They put this in for a reason. They portrayed it this way for a reason. What is that reason? And that's how we've discovered the theological purpose of the book, and that's how we get what we want. When we are teaching, for instance, on the David and Bathsheba incident, if we go to Chronicles and try to bring Chronicles in and its theological point, we're going to mix things up. And for instance, the census that David takes at the end of Samuel, in which it says that it was a bad thing. Well, in Chronicles, that's portrayed as Satan inducing him to do that. And in Samuel, it's more God induces him to do that. And the question, and David is portrayed in a much more positive light in Chronicles through that. If we try to tell both of those stories and mix them together when we're teaching this, we fall into there's a very big danger of missing the point. This is why when we're dealing in Samuel or Kings, the Deuteronomistic history, we want to teach from that perspective. When we're teaching out of Chronicles, we want to teach from that perspective. This isn't conflicting perspectives, but perhaps contrasting perspectives in that they meet the theological purpose of the book. They're still accurate, but just because it leaves information out doesn't make that inaccurate. It does not. It does not provide a completely different set of facts, but it provides the same looks at the same facts and looks at them through a different lens, perhaps a different angle. And that's perspective and purpose. Doesn't mean that they are contradictory. In fact, there's I think a good reason why we are given both, so that we can get a bigger, more complete picture of the whole without missing the points that each individual historian, if we want to use that term, has in presenting his theological history. And it is a theological history. When we get to Chronicles, the purpose of Chronicles, written after the exile, is to focus more on the importance of the temple, the importance of the Davidic monarchy. Of course, Samuel and Kings is written on the importance of obeying the Deuteronomistic or the Deuteronomic covenant, and that as the reason for the exile. Chronicles is more written from the perspective of, okay, now we need to put our nation back together after an exile. And that means we have to return to an emphasis on the temple, the right temple. We see that in the post-exilic prophets, which in OT2 you'll get to. The Davidic monarchy, the importance of that. And so the Davidic monarchy, and David and Solomon in particular, are portrayed in a much more positive light. There's also this sense of all of Israel. We don't see this division so much between the north and the south in Chronicles that we see in Kings. We see more, it's just a focus on the southern kingdom, and they're called all of Israel because the identity of the people after the exile is no longer this northern southern kingdom, but all of Israel that are together back in the land and trying to rebuild and becoming what God had wanted them to be. There's also a bigger emphasis on the priesthood and the cultic apparatus, and that means all the stuff associated with the worship of Yahweh in Chronicles, and we see in Samuel and Kings, again because of this renewed interest and necessity that's seen after the exile of a return to right worship of Yahweh. So the reason that we ask this question and we look at these issues is because we do want to see those two different perspectives between Kings and Samuel, and then Chronicles. One's coming from the Deuteronomic perspective, that is Deuteronomy's expectations, and that covenant is what is a lens through which we view history. The chronicler, to use that term, is more looking at it from the perspective of, okay, we need to teach how important the temple, the worship, the Davidic monarchy is, and our identity as a people. So it's looking at the same historical information, but